Welcome to another episode of Life Stories. Today, we bring you a tale of unexpected twists and profound revelations. Sarah, at 57, believed her life was settled, filled with routine and quiet moments with her husband. But everything changed one evening at a dinner party, when an unexpected connection with an old friend awakened feelings she had long forgotten. Join us as we dive into this emotional journey of love, honesty, and self-discovery. What happens when a moment of vulnerability challenges everything you thought you knew? Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest life stories. At 57, I had settled into what felt like the perfect rhythm of life. It wasn't the kind of life filled with grand adventures or unexpected thrills, but rather a life of quiet, consistent joy. Mornings in the garden, the soft hum of birds in the trees as I tended to my plants, afternoons spent with books, losing myself in historical novels, and evenings, always peaceful, with my husband Tom. We had been married for over 30 years. A lifetime. Really, I had believed that, by this point, the surprises of life were behind us. It was comfortable, predictable, and I couldn't have been more content with the simplicity of it all. But then, everything shifted in a way I never expected. It started innocently enough, as most things do, on a Friday night, when Tom suggested we attend a dinner hosted by one of his longtime colleagues, Andrew, and his wife, Helen. The invitation was nothing out of the ordinary. Andrew was a few years younger than Tom, in his late 40s. Charismatic, with striking silver hair and a presence that seemed to command attention whenever he entered a room. Helen, his wife, was equally charming, elegant, warm, and effortlessly gracious, making anyone who entered their home feel like they had stepped into a haven. I admired her talent for transforming the simplest meals into delightful experiences. Their house, a beautiful suburban colonial, stood like something out of a magazine, with neat hedges and a welcoming front porch that invited you in with the promise of a warm evening. As we stepped inside, soft jazz floated through the air, the gentle rhythm mingling with the aroma of garlic and fresh herbs coming from the kitchen. Candles flickered on the dining table, casting soft shadows that danced along the pale blue walls, creating an ambiance that felt both cozy and refined. It was exactly the kind of evening that was meant to be spent in easy conversation and laughter. "Come on in, Sarah. We're so glad you could make it." Helen's voice was soothing, as warm and inviting as the jazz melodies that surrounded us. She embraced me like an old friend, and her genuine friendliness helped relax my nerves. "Thanks, Helen," I replied, my smile widening as I inhaled the rich, savory scents wafting through the air. "It smells wonderful in here." As we gathered around the table, Andrew poured wine for everyone, his deep voice guiding us through humorous anecdotes about his recent trip abroad. Conversation flowed easily, and laughter came naturally. Tom was in high spirits, clearly happy to unwind away from his stressful work. I was content, enjoying the simple pleasure of a good meal and even better company. It was one of those rare evenings when everything seemed perfectly in place. Then came dessert, heavenly chocolate mousse, garnished with fresh raspberries. Just as I was savoring a bite, Andrew turned to me with a knowing smile. "Sarah, I heard from Tom that you're quite the gardener," he said, his eyes twinkling with interest. "I've been having some trouble with my roses. Would you mind taking a look at them sometime?" I was flattered, of course. I wasn't a professional gardener by any means, but I had a good eye for plants and an abundance of patience. I wouldn't say talented, Andrew, I replied with a laugh. "Just patient, but I'd be happy to take a look sometime." His gaze lingered for just a moment too long, a subtle warmth creeping into his eyes. It was nothing overt, nothing to be alarmed about, but it made my pulse quicken in an unexpected way. I brushed it off, convinced I was imagining things. After dessert, Andrew invited me to step outside onto the spacious patio. Bathed in soft moonlight, the cool evening breeze whispered through the trees surrounding the yard, blending with the faint fragrance of jasmine from Helen's garden. Inside, Tom and Helen were engrossed in conversation about potential vacation spots, leaving Andrew and me to enjoy the quiet solitude of the garden. As we walked to the row of roses, Andrew knelt down, inspecting the leaves closely. "See how the edges are turning yellow?" he asked, his voice soft and low, carrying a tone of genuine curiosity. I leaned closer to get a better look, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. My heartbeat quickened, but I told myself it was nothing. "It looks like they might need more nitrogen," I suggested, my voice steady despite the odd flutter in my chest. Andrew turned to me then, his expression serious yet gentle. "You know, Sarah, I envy what you and Tom have. After 20 years of marriage, Helen and I seem to have drifted apart." His sudden honesty caught me off guard. It wasn't something you usually heard from someone like Andrew, with his charming, confident demeanor, but there it was, an unexpected vulnerability, and it resonated with me in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Every marriage has its ups and downs, Andrew," I replied, my voice gentle. "It's normal." He nodded thoughtfully, his eyes revealing a depth of emotion I hadn't expected. "Maybe it is, but lately, I feel like something's missing." Before I could respond, his hand brushed lightly against mine. Just for a second, but it felt like an electric shock racing up my arm. It was a brief touch. Innocent, but it lingered in the air between us. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, stepping back with genuine embarrassment in his voice. "I didn't mean to cross any boundaries." I hesitated, my emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to retreat, to walk away, but another part, the part one hadn't listened to in years, compelled me to offer him kindness instead. "It's all right," I said quietly, surprising even myself. "You're just being honest." In that brief moment, something shifted. There was a connection, delicate and fleeting, but undeniable. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, and it left me unsettled. Returning inside felt surreal, as though the weight of the evening had shifted in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Tom's familiar smile reassured me, but it also carried a new weight, one I couldn't place. I glanced over at Andrew, noticing how he had retreated into himself, polite and distant, maintaining the professional boundary between us. The evening ended amicably, but my mind was tangled with the emotions I had felt, and the quiet complexity of what had just transpired between Andrew and me. Later that night, as Tom slept peacefully beside me, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my heart restless with questions. Was my reaction simply flattery from unexpected attention? Or had Andrew awakened something dormant within me? Could a brief moment of connection really disrupt the tranquility I had cherished for decades? I wasn't sure, but beneath the confusion, I felt something stirring, something fragile, but undeniably alive. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would force me to confront parts of myself I had long avoided. In the days following that dinner, I found myself restless in ways I hadn't expected. My usual routines, morning walks in the garden, afternoons with a book, and evenings spent with Tom, felt somehow hollow. Beneath the familiar comfort of these habits, a quiet unrest began to take root. I couldn't stop replaying that moment on the patio with Andrew, the way his hand brushed mine, the vulnerability in his eyes, and the unexpected warmth that surged through me when he shared his feelings. I had felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't that I had fallen for him, not in the way one might fall for another person. I was still deeply in love with Tom, but something about that brief encounter had awakened a part of me that had been dormant for too long. I couldn't ignore the fact that, for the first time in years, I had felt truly desired, noticed. The soft connection that had developed between Andrew and me, though fleeting, had made me realize just how much I had been missing. Even in my seemingly perfect marriage, I tried to push these thoughts away, bury them beneath my daily tasks. I reminded myself that I loved Tom, that he was my life partner, my friend, but the more I tried to suppress the feelings Andrew had stirred, the more they seemed to bubble up to the surface. Quietly but persistently, I began noticing little things. How I looked forward to the rare messages or exchanges Andrew and I had. About nothing important. Just casual small talk. It was harmless. I told myself. It wasn't anything to worry about. And yet, every time I saw his name on my phone or heard his voice in a message, my heart would race with a mixture of excitement and guilt. I wasn't sure if I was simply flattered by the attention or if something deeper was at play. The connection I felt with Andrew was different from anything I had experienced with Tom. Tom was my constant, the rock I had leaned on for decades. He was steady, reliable, and we shared a deep bond built over the years. But with Andrew, it was something else, something new. Something that sparked excitement within me in a way that Tom's comforting presence no longer did. It wasn't that Tom wasn't still my love, my partner, it was that I had begun to feel that something was missing. That perhaps I had neglected parts of myself in the process of growing older and more settled. One afternoon, as I was trimming the hedges in the garden, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I looked up to find Andrew standing by the gate, casually dressed in a blue shirt and jeans. He looked relaxed, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made my stomach flutter. "Hi, Sarah," he said, smiling warmly. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced. But I was hoping we could talk more about those roses. I've been trying to figure out what to do with them." My pulse quickened at the sight of him, though I tried to mask my nerves with a casual smile. "No problem at all," I said, hoping I sounded more composed than I felt. "I'd be happy to help." As I led him into the garden, I couldn't ignore the tension that simmered between us. It wasn't just about gardening tips anymore. There was something else in the air. Something unspoken. We both knew it, but neither of us addressed it directly. As we stood by the roses, Andrew once again mentioned his marriage to Helen, and the distance that had begun to form between them. I listened, my heart aching with empathy for him. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the flowers. "You were right, marriages go through phases. But sometimes you feel like something is missing. Like you're not really seen anymore." I felt a pang in my chest. I understood what he was saying all too well. The years of familiarity with Tom, the predictability of our routine. Had I too become numb to the little moments of connection that once filled our marriage with joy? "You know, I admire what you and Tom have," Andrew continued. "You seem to have something special. Something real." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't looking for anything beyond friendship with Andrew, but I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. His honesty, his openness, it had stirred something within me. Something I had forgotten existed. Andrew looked up at me, and for a brief moment, our eyes locked. His gaze held a depth of emotion I hadn't expected, and I felt my heart race. He reached out, his hand brushing mine again, this time more intentionally, as if testing the waters between us. It was a small gesture, but it sent a shock through me, a rush of heat that I couldn't explain. Before I could react, he quickly withdrew his hand, embarrassment flashing across his face. "Sorry," he muttered, stepping back. "I shouldn't have done that." I could feel the weight of the moment settle around us, heavy with unspoken words. "It's fine, Andrew," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure if I truly believed that. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us moving, each caught in our own thoughts. Finally, I broke the silence. "I should go inside," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Helen will be wondering where we are." As I walked back toward the house, my mind raced. What had just happened? Was it just a fleeting moment? Or had it meant something more? I couldn't deny that I had felt a connection with Andrew, something that shook me to my core. But what did that mean for my marriage? And more importantly, what did it mean for me? As I rejoined Tom and Helen inside, I felt a sense of surreal detachment, as though I were living in two separate worlds. One where I was with Tom, my husband of 30 years, and another where I was beginning to question everything I had ever known about myself. That evening, as I lay beside Tom in bed, I couldn't escape the swirl of emotions that had taken root inside me. Was I simply flattered by the attention? Or had something deeper been awakened, something that I had long buried under the layers of routine and comfort? The truth was, I didn't know, but I couldn't ignore the fact that something had shifted. And that shift was only the beginning. The days that followed were a mixture of confusion and clarity. I went through the motions of my life with Tom, morning walks, quiet afternoons, and evenings spent watching old movies. Yet, beneath the surface of my everyday routine, I could no longer ignore the tension that had settled in my heart. My thoughts often drifted to Andrew and that night on the patio. I felt like I had been handed a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. And the more I tried to suppress it, the more insistent it became. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about Andrew anymore. Not really. It was about me. About the life I had built and the parts of myself I had neglected. It was about being honest with Tom, the man who had shared so many years of his life with me. The guilt that lingered in my chest became unbearable, and I realized that I owed him the truth. It was one afternoon, as I sat in the garden pruning my roses, when I heard Tom's voice calling to me from the back porch. My heart skipped a beat. I knew this moment was coming. I couldn't keep carrying this weight, pretending everything was as it should be. It was time to speak the truth, even if it shattered everything I had known. Sarah, can we talk? Tom's voice was calm but carried an undertone of concern. I set down the shears, my hands trembling slightly, and walked over to where he stood. Of course, I said, my voice unsteady. What's on your mind? Tom looked at me for a long moment, his expression soft yet filled with something I couldn't quite place. He seemed to be searching for something, answers, perhaps, or a clue to the storm that had been brewing between us. I've noticed something lately, he said, his tone measured. At the gala, the way Andrew was looking at you, and how you looked at him. I could feel it. I didn't want to admit it, but I saw it. You've been distant. My chest tightened. I had hoped that Tom wouldn't notice, that I could continue living in the comfort of denial. But the truth was out, hanging in the air between us. He had seen it, and I had to face it. I didn't mean for this to happen, Tom, I said softly, the guilt rising in my throat. But it did. Something happened, and I can't ignore it anymore. It's not physical, but emotionally, I felt drawn to someone else. Tom's face shifted, first with confusion, then with a quiet sadness. He stepped closer to me, his presence still reassuring despite the tension between us. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight of understanding I hadn't expected. I don't know what to say. Sarah, I've known something was off for a while now. But hearing it from you, it's hard. I swallowed hard, the tears threatening to spill. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Tom. I always have. But this feeling, it's awakened something in me that I didn't know was there. For a long time, we stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Tom spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. I appreciate your honesty, Sarah. You could have hidden this from me. But you didn't. That means more to me than you know. I stared at him, overwhelmed by the grace and understanding in his eyes. I'm so sorry, I whispered, the words feeling inadequate. Tom took a deep breath and reached out for my hand, his touch warm and steady. I'm not asking you to stop feeling whatever you're feeling. But you need to figure out what you want. I want you to be happy, Sarah, no matter what that looks like. Even if it means change. His words were a bittersweet balm, easing some of the guilt that weighed on me, but also deepening my uncertainty. I had always known Tom to be strong, steady, and unshakable, but now, I saw the cracks in that image. The vulnerability that came with his love for me. I don't know what I want, Tom, I admitted, my voice trembling. I'm so lost. Tom squeezed my hand gently. Take the time you need. We've been through a lot together. And I believe we can work through this too. But you have to be honest with yourself, Sarah, and with me. As I stood there in the garden, with Tom's hand holding mine, I realized that the path forward was uncertain. But it was also an opportunity for growth. I had never expected to be faced with such a profound moment of self-discovery. But I knew that whatever came next, I couldn't hide from the truth any longer. I didn't know what would happen. Would I stay with Tom? Would my feelings for Andrew continue to grow? I couldn't answer that yet. But I knew that honesty, both with myself and with Tom, was the first step on a journey that could reshape everything. And so, I made a promise to myself in that moment, no matter how difficult. I would follow this path toward clarity, toward understanding. Whatever the outcome, I would face it with open eyes, ready to confront the truths that had been hiding in the shadows for so long. In the weeks that followed our conversation, life felt surreal. Tom and I began to speak more openly than we had in years, confronting our feelings, fears, and desires with an honesty that was both uncomfortable and liberating. It wasn't easy, nothing about this process was, but somehow, we found ourselves growing closer, despite the uncertainty that loomed over us. Meanwhile, Andrew and I kept our distance, both giving ourselves the space we needed to reflect on the emotional bond that had formed between us. I realized that, while the connection with him had been powerful, it was Tom I had built my life with. He was the constant, the one who had always been there, even when life felt unsteady. And so, I began to understand that sometimes, love isn't just about passion or excitement, it's about the foundation of trust, respect, and companionship that you build over time. One day, as I sat in the garden, surrounded by the flowers I had cultivated over the years, I realized that the path I was on wasn't just about making a choice between two people. It was about choosing myself, understanding who I was, what I needed, and what I wanted for the rest of my life. It was about embracing change, even when it was uncomfortable, and being honest about the parts of myself that had been hidden away for so long. And as I looked out at the blooming garden, I knew that whatever came next, whether it was with Tom or a new chapter entirely, I would face it with clarity, courage, and an openness to whatever life had in store for me. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest life stories.